Welcome to another episode of How I'm Building This, where we interview startup founders that are in the thick of building their businesses. We learn from their mistakes and also learn how to overcome some of our challenges. Today we have Peter Fishman from Mozart Data. Peter, thank you once again for, of course, giving me some time. How are you today?
Thanks, Prateek. Great to be here.
Thank you so much. Peter, you may not remember this, but about 3.5 years ago, I reached out to you, cold email. If I remember correctly, y'all had just about finished YC, or I think like about building the first, my first version, and I had reached out to you to essentially, get your feedback, interview you on what is actually Activated Scale today. So I just really wanted to once again thank you for giving me those 30 minutes back then. It was super helpful, and it's really gotten me so much further along.
Yeah, I would say just in general, for those people that have done a startup journey, I think you end up really appreciating the challenges along the way. So the pay it forwards and the being part of a community, and I've given advice to people and watched their business scale massively to the point that I'm now asking them for advice, and vice versa. So it really is sort of a really unifying experience.
That's for sure. So before we jump into Mozart Data, I'd love to learn more. Who's Peter? Where did you grow up, and what really got you into data and analytics?
Sure. My name is Peter Fishman. I go by Fish. I grew up in the great state of New Jersey. I, from a very young age, was always into really sports statistics. So data associated with all the different sports teams I was following, and I was sort of never quite good enough to aspire to playing for some of those teams, but I was always kind of thinking, okay, what are some amazing insights that I could find in the data? My favorite players, teams, and then that ended up translating to my academic life. So I spent a big part of my professional career trying to be an academic. So I was a graduate student. I did a PhD in economics and statistics and psychology. So I sort of had that academic background that sort of taught me a lot about how to use data in a very critical way. I did my PhD at Cal, and I fell in love with the Bay Area, and I wanted to stay out here. And the way to stay out here is to join a tech company. So eventually I found my way into doing data roles at tech companies. And there were less formal data roles at the time. It was very, very much the case that really only the big companies, the really well-funded companies, the late-stage companies that achieved massive scale had the data, had the budgets to afford kind of data insights and data analysis, and where you could have that level of impact. And over the last, I would say, 2 decades, you've seen this massive scale up in terms of how much companies care about their data, capture their data, have the ability to consume and analyze their data, and then have also built up teams around it that they found that they were getting those valuable insights from a lot of people that were just experts in working with, manipulating, cleaning, asking the right questions of data. So that became my profession. I was a data scientist, and ultimately I decided, I went sort of a little bit more of sort of a managerial and teams path, and ended up turning that into somewhat of a profession, and then hopped to a number of different startups, building out the same sort of team and infrastructure and sort of insights machine in a lot of different contexts, in B2C and B2B, DTC, SaaS, all the letters. And ultimately, instead of doing it yet another time, my friend Dan and I ultimately decided to build Mozart Data, which was trying to bring the staff that we would bring to these companies. So trying to effectively build Pete and Dan at scale. And that was sort of the genesis of Mozart.
That's amazing. So So where did you meet Dan, and how did you decide that he was the right person to build a company with?
It's a really, really fortunate that I met Dan about 25 years ago when we were both in college. So we actually went to different colleges. Dan went um, to college in Pittsburgh at CMU, and I was in college in North Carolina too. But Dan's best friend in high school was my college roommate.
Okay.
So just coincidentally, he came down to visit, and the three of us have remained really great friends and have both sort of done a number of things in the startup.
That's amazing. So is this the team with whom that you'll have also started your like hot sauce brand with?
That's right. The three of us a decade ago started a hot sauce company together, um, and sort of got our entrepreneurial feet wet, uh, and then we're a great team. So we complement each other, and ultimately, we're really technologists. We're not really just hot sauce entrepreneurs. So we eventually got together to build a data company, and all of us had a background actually from different angles of data. So Dan more sort of as a backend engineer, myself more as a data scientist, and sort of the collection sort of uh, was was well positioned to do what we think of as data engineering as a service, but that includes sort of thinking about the data model and thinking about a lot of the elements of sort of getting data pipelines working, but getting sort of that stack and that machine up and
Amazing. So you all did Y Combinator in summer of 2020. What made you decide that you all should go through an accelerator program?
so Dan had previously done YC and revenue startups
Okay.
in a past life at some other companies. So Dan was an OG, having done YC in 2010, and he really wanted to he really wanted to recreate that sort of magic. And the magic is there's a certain energy, pace, franticness that YC brings to a company. So, I think some of the magic is sort of looking to your right and looking to your left and seeing a bunch of people that are making a lot of progress and feeling that sort of innate drive really get stoked.
Sure.
So I think just to put it in full context, Dan and I started this company in April of 2020, which was right at the start of the pandemic, and we were very fortunate. We got into the YC Summer 20 program, which was which was tough because we actually initially sort of got waitlisted or re-interviewed because sort of our idea hadn't fully sort of come together, and what we were left with was working separately, working on Zoom. Dan lived 10 miles from me, but again,
Sure.
this was the summer of 2020. Nobody saw each other, and we wanted to sort of. I think it's important to say we wanted to cheat. Cheating means like you need to take every advantage you can find out there, and there's a cheat code which is how do you move the company along faster.
Sure.
So if you think about sort of a company having some sort of exponential growth, um, the key is that just like time passes by, and then with that exponential growth, it will look, sort of looking backwards like an incredibly steep curve from a linear sense. And the key then becomes how do you make time move faster, not violating any of the laws of the universe, but how do you literally make your company move faster becomes the challenge for the company. And YC was certainly one of those cheat codes for us. It's 3 months, but I don't know if it was 3 years, but it was something like we ended up going from $0,000 of ARR to $24,000 of ARR when we graduated. So not a not some sort of colossal amount, but that's an infinity X over 3 months. So I think the key is really how do you get that rapid how do you make time move faster at your company? Because ultimately everything in life is just sort of like a race against time, and that was kind of one of our early cheats to go from being a totally nascent startup to something that was actually ready to sort of get in the game.
It's amazing. Wow. So you all have raised a series, uh, I believe it's like an A round. What was going on in your business that it was the right time to, like raise your next round so that y'all can exponentially grow?
Yeah, I think money is a great accelerant of time. So one of the ways that you can make things again go quickly is you can invest a lot of resources that you don't have. You can sort of borrow against your future earnings, and not a great practice as a consumer. So it's not always the best thing to load up your credit card with bills. Um, what when you should do this as a consumer, or when you should do this as a good example is when you get a mortgage to buy a house, rather than wait to have sort of all of the assets and resources that you need to buy a house. The bank will loan you money knowing that you'll work for 30 years to pay it. And I think the answer was, once something sort of clicked with us as having some sort of meaningful traction that we wanted to get into or invest in, or that we had some deep belief in, that's kind of when we said, okay, let's hit some of the gas on this. Now, I will say that sort of around that time, though we raised sort of in 2022, but in certainly 2021, there was a mindset of let's take a round, whether it's a seed round, an A round, a B round, and let's make sure that we can spend it all in 18 months. And that is obviously very much no longer, first of all, no longer the prevailing wisdom. It never should have been the prevailing wisdom, but it's certainly one of the things that we think about is how do we use money efficiently to essentially, again, accelerate.
That's amazing. On your website, you say that you're the modern data platform for growing businesses. What is the pain you are solving, and for whom?
Sure. So, when you put it like that, it certainly doesn't feel clear enough who our ICP is. I think one thing that is very important for startups is to always sort of who they're selling to, and then find more of those people and just slightly, sort of expand the circle just slightly. So we solve the pain point of it is still annoying and expensive and moderately intimidating to get the value of the modern data set. So there's an incredible set of technologies that's there. That's sort of a name that's been overused, the modern data set, but really what it represents is an incredible set of technologies that have made it incredibly easy to do the rote parts of, of data work that existed, a decade ago. So a decade ago, to even just get started, you would need a few data engineers to move data to a central place, to set up and maintain a data warehouse, to sort of transform and clean the data and schedule it and sort of monitor these pipelines. And there have become a set of tools, including ours, that have made this much, much faster and much easier. And in some sense, more powerful, more robust, more reliable, all of the things that sort of trip up data teams. The reality is there are almost everybody wants to use data in their job. They want to make more informed decisions. They want to really, like you want, if you're in your car, you want to know how fast you're going. You want to have a compass that, shows you the direction that you're headed. You want to be able to know all of these things. And one of the things that I've learned is, that, we've decided that, hey, while this powerful technology exists, not everybody knows about it, not everybody can take advantage of it. And we sort of felt like there were a lot of people that had worked at companies that had the advantages of the modern data stack. And they were smart and savvy about data, and they wanted to use the data and have big impacts on their company and ultimately their careers. Like, this is really something that could really springboard a career in a really impressive way. Um, and we thought that we could provide that as a service, basically the data engineering. Turns out that the sort of later parts of data work become very bespoke. They're very sort of dependent on understanding the context of the business, understanding what certain terms mean in the business that are very unique across companies. So we wanted to do all sort of the easy parts, sort of the data engineering, and we wanted to leave the hard parts, sort of knowing the business and finding the insights and sort of driving a company to, something very valuable. We wanted to leave that to those operators that were very data savvy.
Understood. Okay, that makes sense. So I mean, you said that when you went through YC, you all went from zero to about $24,000. How did you find your first few customers that were willing to pay you to solve that problem?
So, in the spirit of let's cheat, some of our first few customers, I think two of our first few customers, I had worked with in the past.
Maybe.
So, it's people that wanted me to be, a data practitioner at their company. They said, Fish, come in and solve some of our data problems. And I said, well, I have this new job. I do this in some scaled fashion at this company, Mozart Data. Mozart Data sets up the stack I would set up for you. So ultimately, it's actually two very sort of different pieces of advice. So some people say, leverage your existing network, do things that don't scale, find customers, get their honest feedback, see what, these were people that I knew and were in some level friends of mine. But the same thing that they're signing, 5-figure contracts to work with you, they're no longer friends, they're customers. They still are friends in the real world, but in my professional world, they're my customers and I do have to serve them. And I think one school of thought here is, in order to find something that really, really, really scales, you have to be able to go out into the world and find cold distribution. You have to be able to get customers based on word of mouth, based on content, based on sort of connecting with a cold customer's need in a way that deeply resonates, that they really want your solution. So one way of doing that is finding, grinding and struggling and eventually finding that first customer. The other way of doing it is sort of cheating and saying, okay, well, let's find customers. Let's find out what those customers want. And from that, we'll figure out what's scalable or not about our business. And that's kind of the very quick tension of anybody starting a company. We went with that second round.
Sure.
So generally, Y Combinator has the philosophy of that sort of second, where you find any sort of trick to find your first set of customers, and whether that's your network, whether that's the YC network. In fact, I think it was certainly more than half of our first 10 or 20 customers were from Y Combinator. So it's we're a company that targets Series A sort of growth-minded startups. Both sort of we sort of, I mean, we're not religiously a Series A play if you're a Series B, or if you're a seed, or if you're a C, or if you're a pre-seed. But actually, it really sort of depends where you are on your data journey is the truth. But Y Combinator had a number of companies that really fit our ICP, so we were able to grow there. But that's not cold outreach. That's like lukewarm outreach.
Yeah.
And you have this sort of tension of, are you learning something that's not scalable, or are you learning kind of what pieces are scalable? So you have to ask yourself some tough and honest questions.
Yeah, that's fair. So what was that feedback loop, that you developed with your first few customers that helped you to, of course, ship product faster, but also helped you to iterate?
Well, I think the first thing, and this is a Reid Hoffman quote, but the first thing is, you can't be proud of the first product that you ship, and that's certainly not his quote, but it's something very similar.
Very similar, yes.
And and the reason you can't do that is that you want to put it in customers' hands. You want to see what they're using. You want to see what they'll pay for. You want to see what they don't really care about. If you build something and you show somebody something, say, oh, that's interesting. I can imagine using that. That's very different than getting them to pay for it. It's very different than seeing them use it a lot. It's very different than seeing them expand. It's very different than seeing them affirm. So we're trying to really understand what are the features that are driving those activities, those behaviors. In economics, so I'll talk about my economics PhD. There's this concept of sort of a revealed preference. There's a stated preference, and then there's a revealed preference. So, a great example is, if I think about what I'm going to eat for dinner, for lunch today, my stated preference is, I'll be healthy and I'll want a salad. But actually, if you look at the history of my credit card and all of the purchases, they've all been from saving. They have potentially, but you can imagine it being off from McDonald's. So it's sort of a tension between. You have to understand the difference between a revealed and a stated preference. And you need to build for revealed preference. You have to build for what people will actually buy.
Yeah, that's for sure. So now it's been 4-ish years, of course, since you all have been, working on Mozart Data. How are your prospects learning about you all today?
So prospects learn about us in a handful of important ways. So one is just general sort of virality. So our customer, we have great retention. Our customers generally love us, and spread the word. And sometimes customers come from people who were customers at a different company, or they've moved. So all of those things are, that for a business to be successful, it has to have generally what like a venture capitalist might look at is like their retention. So, or their logo retention or their net dollar retention. Both are they're not the same metric, but they have some similarities. In fact, if you have terrible logo retention, you're almost certainly going to have terrible NDR. And that's a great signal, but it also, it has an extra signal because high NDR also means high likelihood of sort of getting some virality. So these things are very closely tied. You want to create an excellent customer experience, for pride's sake, but really also because that's how you move a business. And any business without that channel is just not going to be successful. It's not going to be successful because it's going to lose customers, and it's not going to be successful because it's going to really have to pay a lot to find that next new customer. Now, we do a lot of sort of marketing. So some of that is paid marketing, that's events, ads. Some of it is just content and SEO. So I'm very prolific on the social network of choice for me is LinkedIn. It's sort of everybody's sort of got to find the place where they're most comfortable getting their message, their viewpoint, their perspective out there. For me, generally, it's a pretty frequent cadence of generally short insights or happenings in my world. And then the last piece is that we've really found a huge connection with partnerships. So partnerships are very, very long and hard hill to climb because generally partners are imbalanced. So, one of our technology partners is Snowflake.
Okay.
I recently was attending their summit, and I had a chance just to very quickly meet their founder and took a photo together. And somebody commented, that's a photo of two data CEOs with a combined market cap of over $40 billion, which is true, of course, but that of course is almost all entirely Snowflake. Almost all entirely Snowflake. And what you have is almost always an imbalance in partnerships. So I think it's very important that in the partnerships channel that you are solving a real problem for somebody at that company. So for us, we tend to work very closely with business intelligence tools, um, data activation tools that that find that a lot of their early stage companies are disqualified for not having the sort of data infrastructure that's going to make them successful with the BI tool. But they come to the BI tool first because that's where their mind goes for using data in part of maybe their past life and doing a lot of data problems.
So when you think about partnerships, or what's the approach here, that you're taking so that your partners are also engaged with you all and are, number two, also thinking about Mozart whenever they are speaking with their prospects?
I think I think again, you want to sort of narrow in your ICP. You want to make it very clear who you help, how you help them, and why you can accelerate a deal, or why you can improve the close rate on a deal, or why it's like, at Microsoft we had this term 1+1=3, which always referred to effectively what was the synergy that you're bringing together. Right? Why is it that way? Why is it that that's going to work better together? For us, it is like peanut butter and jelly. There is sort of some obvious parts, which is your dashboards, your data insights are only really as good as your data pipelines are reliable, trusted, from multiple sources. It is the case generally that I find that the most interesting questions that a data team can answer, that an operator can answer, typically come from multiple sources. So very often a lot of tooling is set up that you can very successfully analyze a single source within that tool. So if I want to look at Salesforce, I can create a report how many leads I had this month, or how many leads I had month over month. Any of that's great. Where it gets harder is, what if I want to analyze all of the leads that have taken a certain set of actions in my tool? Well, that's not much. Well, that now requires two pieces of data. That requires the actions, where the source of truth is probably the database, and it also requires the leads, the state of the leads, where the source of truth is probably the CRM. So where we shine and where we create a lot of value is when you have multiple sources, not just two, but maybe even more than that. Some of our customers have hundreds of sources. So it is the case that there is sort of a peanut butter jelly relationship with sort of a lot of the players in the data space. What we try to sell.
Amazing. You said also that you are doing some paid acquisition, you are, SEO, of course, you're active on LinkedIn. What are some of the pillars of like your inbound game that are working really well for you?
Yeah, I think to be frank, a lot of paid acquisition has gotten much better on tracking, so that you can see, from given, keywords, you can see kind of what conversion looks like.
Sure.
That said, that's still the channel that sort of succumbs most to the marketing quote. I know that like 50% of my marketing is working. I just don't know which. So even though the tracking has really massively stepped up in that space, I think most of our success, it's hard to distinguish between, where they initially heard about the product or really had that spark of inspiration. So it's really, for us, we try to be out there in many places. So we try to get digital sort of recognition. We try to get earned media. We try to have, my voice and then the company's social voice out there. We try to write blogs about, we think about data and how we think you should be using data. So it's kind of a little bit of all of the above, and that's where I think it's very easy to track conversions, but very often those conversions aren't speaking to the sort of marginal impact that got somebody very interested. Like, there's typically, generally it's called attribution. I don't like it because most attribution models tend to be like wrong or confusing or a variety of things. So instead, I like to think of it as, what sort of creates the marginal impact that's going to sort of, have you thought. Now, ultimately, probably somebody is clicking on a keyword like Mozart Data, but in practice, it's really like what inspired them to think about sort of using ETL, what inspired them to want to think about data pipelines or a data warehouse. Are they getting to the point of, they're doing a lot of things in their spreadsheets and they just want to automate that process? Like, what is the tipping point? And for, the truth is that is much harder to track, though we do a lot of things in that effort.
Sure. The one thing that's not spoken about loud is about really, managing mental health as a startup founder. I think, this is, at least to me, one of the most, interesting things that I have ever done, but I still sort of struggle with having like an integrated life. What are some of the things that you are doing to manage your mental health?
Well, something's got to give. So, I think that's probably, I think you can listen to some of the cliches, which is you're running a marathon, not a sprint.
Yeah.
I think that's certainly true. You're sort of running a marathon, not a sprint pace. So, I do think everybody's got to find the cadence by which they really like working. For some people, that's 24/7 for forever, and for some people, that's a 40-hour work week. And for some people, that's something that sort of finds the middle. Some people work almost all the time. They open their laptop, they're at work. They close it the last thing they do before they go to bed. So, but they work sort of more casually in sort of the morning hours or dinner hours or whatever it is. So, to me, it's really about kind of finding the beats and cadences that work for you.
Sure.
And it is not the case. I've worked at startups where you work 100 hours a week and they've been unsuccessful. I've worked at places where you work, a very leisurely 40 hours a week, but in very intense times. And that also can work for companies. So it really is very much founder dependent, company dependent. I think what is important there is that all of the companies sort of shares the same sort of mentality around work and around output. We've never been a company that measures hours. We're much more a company that measures output. And so I just think that there just needs to be alignment of almost everyone across the business about like, how we hold ourselves accountable and what we want to judge ourselves against. As far as my own mental health, I think it's, I think this has finally gotten the attention it deserves in terms of it's a very tough founder journey. And I've been the leader of large scale teams at big companies. And that is a very different type of pressure, intensity, challenge. I've managed more people than than is the entirety of Mozart today. So in that level, it's an easier job. In practice, it's a much harder job because the buck does stop here, and it's a lonely journey. So I think that there is this challenge, the sort of the standard duck challenge, which is looking very calm on the surface when you're paddling like crazy. Now I don't have the great poker face to pull that off, so I am constantly paddling like crazy, and my whole team always thinks that I'm paddling like crazy. But the sort of the challenge that I think a lot of founders have with this, and I would put myself in this camp, but I don't necessarily do it. The challenge is literally keeping that intensity while sort of projecting a lot of confidence to the market, to the team, to the investors, to yourself, your co-founder, to your leadership. Like all of these things is like it's a very on the one hand you have to be paranoid about everything, and on the other hand you have to exude confidence. So it's really it's the type of crazy making behavior. And I think that has had a big toll on a number of founders for a while, but again, I sort of spoke earlier about sort of feeling that sense of community with both YC and just more in general, like startup founders who have gone through a similar journey.
All of us have made a ton of mistakes. What are some of the things that you wish that you wouldn't have done? As you were building Mozart Data.
Sure. The first mistake that I made was my computer is actually running out of battery, so I'm just going to very quickly plug it in for just 1 second.
That's fine.
So, so picking up on the question of mistakes,
Yeah.
I think the biggest mistakes that people are on are maybe spending mistakes, hiring mistakes, things that cost time, things that cost customers. I think the bigger thing to me that I tend to harp on are more like strategic mistakes.
Okay.
So, like a non-learning when it was out. So for us, I think the mistake that I want to, and I started to talk about this earlier in this conversation. The one that I do want to talk about is partnerships. So very quickly, we realized this is the part of the data ecosystem that we wanted to solve. We said, combining my skills and Dan's skills, we want to sort of play in this part. Now, there's many ways to be successful within the data ecosystem. There are BI tools that have sold for billions of dollars. There are obviously warehousing infrastructure companies that are worth billions of dollars. There's, you can go, further upstream, further downstream. There's consultancies, have big businesses. We found kind of our niche. We said, we want to set up the modern data stack for SMBs. We thought that we would be really, really great at doing that. Very quickly, we realized, okay, we have to understand the landscape of where we fit in relative to a number of partners. We figured that out. We said, okay, these downstream partners are going to be very key for us because you can't really get any value out of the tool as just like a standalone tool. So, and the same would be true of any of your infrastructure. So it's like, well, what's the value of AWS? Well, it's like, it's nothing without actually, some application downstream. So, so I would say that we said, okay, we really need to work with partners. And, some of those partners would be our technology partners. Some of those partners would be BI tools. And typically a partnerships conversation would go, hey, you do this, we do this, we'd be great partners. And everybody would agree. And it would be a fantastic conversation. Because intuitively, there is a huge prize that if I help all the customers that you find, and you help all the customers that I find, we'll both be massively better off, and it'll be amazing, and we'll both, be very, very successful. And that only makes sense, like in theory. It only sort of in the real world there are people that have to execute these strategies. There are people that have to be bought into this partnership. There's it's and I think there's a surprising number of founders that I found that have massively struggled with this particular channel, but it is such an important one in the data space, and probably in many others. But this is the one that I'm very familiar with. So I think the biggest mistake that we made was not being hyper focused on solving one particular problem, one particular type of partner, where we basically made that person's life. And today we are hyper focused on making our BI partners who sell to SMBs live. And the thing, our superpower is for all of the companies that want to transition from, spreadsheets to a BI tool, but they don't have the data engineering resources to make data pipelines, to make ETL, to make data warehousing work for them, to centralize their data, build a data model. We will help make that happen. We will make them successful. So rather than say we do ETL, rather than say we do data modeling, I think all of these are just words. What we do is we make them succeed downstream in their BI tool of choice. So people have strong preferences about how they like to, move their data, how they like to interact with their data, and all the different, business intelligence companies compete on building sort of the interface that best kind of resonates with these customers. But we want to make, for any given interface that the customer likes, we want to make sure that they're working with reliable, fresh, automated data, and that's incredibly valuable. In fact, from my perspective, the most valuable part of the experience. But I think that where we've focused on is really creating value for those customers of that particular, sales group. And if you can do that, now there's an actual incentive to make the partnership work. Very often, we sort of leave it at this sort of lofty level. You're a peanut butter salesman, I'm a jelly salesman, and obviously we'll just sell each other's products. And that never actually works in practice because you're involved in a peanut butter sale and you forget about the jelly. You just do. It's human nature, and I think you really have to understand that to me is one of the biggest learnings, though it seems rather obvious in hindsight. Now, of course, with many other startup learnings, with many other failures, with many other challenges, but that one really sticks out to me.
Understood. Well, Peter, this has been amazing. Thank you so much. Learned so much from you. Would love to understand what's like next for you, what's next for Mozart, and and how can folks keep up with you.
Well, I'd say the next step for Mozart is just to do more of the same. It's to continue its mission of building out sort of the easiest, fastest, cheapest way to get on board the modern data stack. So we make companies successful with data. What we're looking forward to this year is obviously we're building out still a number of sort of features that sort of integrate us more closely with a combination of our partners. We've sort of built out some, sort of race to value type features, including some things leveraging the power of AI that we think are really helpful in a very natural way within our product, which has all this context of your entire data pipeline. So I think really what we're looking forward to most is, keeping our heads down, continuing to solve problems for sort of like an expanding niche of customers. And, that's something to be on the lookout. If you're a company that's trying to get up and running with their data infrastructure, you have multiple data sources, you want to sort of automate away some of the tedious tasks and spreadsheets, Mozart Data is a great solution.
It's amazing. Thank you once again. This has been amazing. Really appreciate your time. Thank you so much.
Thanks again. Thanks for having me.
Of course, absolutely.